Hiya! Welcome! In today's video, I want to show you my Beatles collection, but a little bit differently. I'm not going to show any albums as such, any of the CDs that I've got. I have unboxed a couple of Beatles CDs on my channel in the past, and fairly recently I unboxed the absolutely amazing Beatles singles vinyl record box set. An absolutely phenomenal purchase, one of my favourite things in my entire music collection now. But this video, I'm going to focus on visual media that I've got relating to the Beatles. All the DVDs and Blu-rays, essentially, that I've managed to collect over the years relating to the Fab Four. One thing that I thought about including in this video, which I didn't, is the Beatles albums in stereo box set that I've got, because they do contain DVD discs with a mini documentary about each album. But for me, that release is primarily about the CDs, it's about the albums themselves, and the DVD documentaries are like little extras. I want to focus on items in my Beatles collection where the DVD or the Blu-ray is the main thing. It's not really much of an order, but I'll try and do the movies in order, certainly. And I'm going to start out with the first movie that the Beatles were ever in, A Hard Day's Night. This is on Blu-ray. The original film came out in 1964. 50th anniversary restoration. Unusually, this isn't an Apple Records release. I don't know how publishing works in the music and film industry, but I think for some reason Apple don't own the copyright to this. This was released by a company called Second Sight Films. As far as films go, I'm not the biggest fan of music acts and bands in films. A lot of them, especially nowadays, seem to be sort of catered towards children. This one, although it's quite fun and there's nothing sort of adult about it particularly, it was of a different age. Many people say that this is the best film the Beatles were in, and I find that difficult to disagree with, to be honest. It's a lot of fun, it's a bit silly, there's no real good story to it, but it's a band who are just about to sort of really explode. 64 arguably was their breakout year in terms of when they really made it massive in the United States. And from then on it was to the moon and back, really. This was a band, I think, that was captured just before that moment where they just really took off into the stratosphere, even though they of course had been Britain's biggest band for a couple of years or so at this point. That's a great Blu-ray. The follow-up to Hard Day's Night was of course a year later, 1965, Help. And whereas Hard Day's Night was in black and white, Help was the first colour motion picture starring the Beatles. There again, this is a Blu-ray release. This one is an Apple release. Just have a quick look inside. There's not really a lot to see in the Hard Day's Night box, that's for sure. The packaging in this is a little bit more interesting, as we've got a nice digipack there, little booklet. Apple, when they re-release Beatles material, be them albums or movies, they always do a nice job with the packaging and with the reading material. I always find that. Help, I've seen it a couple of times. There again, it's a lot of fun. The Beatles obviously were massive all over the world by this point. 1965, there was no denying that they were absolutely just the most popular thing since sliced bread. I think Hard Day's Night for me is a better film because there's kind of a little bit more of an innocence to it. There's still surprisingly competent actors, despite none of the Fab Four obviously having been trained as actors. I know some of them, John Lennon, Ringo Starr in particular, and Paul McCartney as well actually, would go on to star in other motion pictures over the years. Well worth having in the collection. Not my favourite Beatles film, but I would rather watch this over one that I will talk about very soon. Here's a controversial one that got absolutely slated upon its release, 1967's TV movie Magical Mystery Tour. As you can see, it is another Blu-ray release. Slightly underwhelming packaging from Apple this time, as there's no outer slip case. There's a nice little booklet inside though, colourful disc as well, bright yellow with the Rainbow Magical Mystery Tour motif on it. This movie originally came out around Christmas, could have been Boxing Day 1967 or something like that, on BBC One I think it was, and the critics hated it. I think some of the fans didn't like it either. I think it gets judged a bit harshly, really. It's not brilliant. There's no coherent storyline to it whatsoever. It's pretty mad, and it's just really sort of self-indulgent a lot of the time. But it was filmed in 1967, which really was the peak of hippiedom across the world, and the summer of love had just been and gone. This sort of captures the zeitgeist, as it were. But as an actual film goes, an actual movie, it's very self-indulgent, it's very colourful, and you hear some great music, obviously, as you do in all Beatles films, and I do quite like this. I would rather watch this than the next film that I'm going to show you in my Beatles collection. It's also quite a short film, this, 53 minutes. This is good, but if you're looking for an actual film with a storyline, then you might want to give this one a miss, but if you love good music, then watch it. Maybe a controversial opinion now, but here's one that I have watched once. Maybe I've seen it more than once in my life, but probably the first time I watched it I was too young to remember. But one that I don't massively like, and this is 1968's Yellow Submarine. I don't know if it's because it's a cartoon, or that it's a Beatles film, but the Beatles aren't actually providing their own voices. They all got voice actors in. One of the voice actors in Yellow Submarine was Geoffrey Hughes, who went on to star in Coronation Street, The Royal Family, Keeping Up Appearances, and lots of other things. Packaging wise, it's lovely. We've got the outer sleeve, and we've got a very nice digibook here. Another glossy booklet there, which gives lots of information about the production, lots of colour photos. Really cracking set. But the actual movie itself, I watched it when I bought this and I just didn't enjoy it particularly. Obviously there is more of a storyline than there is in Magical Mystery Tour, certainly, but just something didn't really resonate with me for this, and I can't quite put my finger on it because there's great music on it. Maybe it was the time it came out, 1968. At that point, the Beatles, although they still had a year and a half left, I think the cracks were starting to appear, really. Because this came out, I think, around the time, either just before or just after the release of the White Album, which, as great an album as that is, it did kind of highlight the divisions within the group that had formed. I will watch this again. I will watch all my Beatles stuff again over time, but this is not one that is sort of high on my list of priorities, but I'm glad I've got it. One movie that I do think is even inferior to Yellow Submarine is the most controversial Beatles film of all, even more controversial than Magical Mystery Tour in my opinion, and it is this, the infamous 1970 biopic Let It Be. Now, interesting release this. This is kind of a semi-official Beatles DVD. I'm not sure exactly which country it came out, this. I'm trying to find some sort of country note on it. It looks like it could be American, but I don't know. If it is American, then it'll be a Region 0 DVD that's playable worldwide. Apple Music have never officially re-released this, not since, I think, around maybe the last official release of Let It Be for home audiences might have been a VHS release or even a Betamax release in the 1980s. Because this is a film that, if you watch it, it is exactly the opposite of how you imagine a Beatles film should be. Whereas all the other Beatles films, whether you think they're really good or not, they're kind of really joyful and uplifting and colourful. This one is negative, it's kind of dark and gloomy. The band are arguing, there's the infamous row between Paul McCartney and George Harrison in this. It does really shine a light on the fact that the band were breaking up. If you watch it, it's basically watching a band break up in front of your eyes. Yes, it features highlights from the rooftop concerts on top of Apple HQ, and it's very interesting to sort of see them work, albeit in a really sort of horrible setting at first, and then they all move to their Apple recording studio to try and sort of salvage the project, as it were, nearer the end. This is a very sort of semi-official release. In fact, it could even be completely unofficial. I bought this off a seller on Discogs some years ago. Will Apple and the Beatles ever release this officially again? This year would have been the year, because it would have been the 50th anniversary of Let It Be, but I think that's been and gone, and nothing, so I don't think we're ever going to see this come out with sort of bells and whistles as a proper Blu-ray release. Quite a rarity, and it's a pretty moribund experience, I have to say, watching this, but it's an interesting artefact to have if you're a Beatles fan, certainly. Moving on is my favourite item in my Beatles DVD and Blu-ray collection, and it is the one I've watched the most. It's the biggest thing as well, and it is the Anthology box set. This is one of my favourite box sets for anything in my collection. I've got quite a few DVD box sets. I love it. The DVD set, I'm not sure when that came out, early noughties I think. It'd come out on VHS in the late 90s, but the original TV show came out in 1995. ITV showed it over 8 weeks in late 1995. Really lovely box set. Nothing sort of massively exciting, but it's what's in it that counts. Just the documentaries in here are fascinating. This documentary series, Anthology, was released alongside Anthology One, and that contained Free as a Bird, the first new Beatles record in, at that point, it would have been over 25 years. This is something I've re-watched a lot of times, even though there's a lot to get through. This is my favourite thing. If I had to get rid of all of my Beatles collection, but I could keep one thing, it would be this, because this is something that I will re-watch quite often. Fascinating documentary. Could it have been better? Yeah, they missed lots of stuff out. Obviously, they didn't focus on the negatives. They didn't focus on things like how much they sort of hated each other during the Let It Be sessions and controversies surrounding John Lennon's drug addiction and things like that. All that sort of stuff was sort of swept under the carpet, and we just focused on the nice things. These are 4 cheeky chappies from Liverpool. Even so, to me, that doesn't matter, because this is an artifact documenting the biggest band ever in the history of pop music, and it's a celebration of them. I like a documentary that's warts and all, but I also like a documentary that's very celebratory and is really sort of well produced from start to finish, and Anthology is that documentary series to a T. Excellent, my favourite thing, this. Altogether now, this is a documentary film, and it is technically a Beatles release. It came out via Apple as well, but really this is more a sort of documentary about Cirque du Soleil, which are of course the Canadian entertainment circus type troupe thing that were running the Beatles Love Show a decade or so back. This was just a purchase that I didn't make until a few years ago, after I'd really sort of got everything that I really wanted in my Beatles collection, and then I waited to see this cheap, because this wasn't something I was desperate for. It's interesting, but it's not really about the Beatles. It's just about the production of the Love Show that was in, well, it was in Las Vegas originally, and it probably toured over the world at some point as well. It's good that the Beatles themselves, or the surviving Beatles at this point, were involved in the conception of this stage show. Just a standard movie really. It has got a little booklet inside. It's fine, this, it's okay. And obviously the Love album, that was a good seller. That is a very good album. It's difficult to describe that. It's technically classed as a remix album, but it's not remixes how you'd imagine, sort of, you know, dance music remixes. Altogether now is watchable, but inessential, definitely. The only unofficial Beatles release that I've got in my DVD and Blu-ray collection is this one. This was just something that caught my eye when it came out in 2017, and I thought, oh, I'll get that. I believe this is available, or it was available, last I checked, on Netflix and Prime Video as well. So this can be streamed, I think, pretty easily now. But this is It Was 50 Years Ago Today, directed by Alan G. Parker. And it's really one of those, you see a lot of them, especially on sort of streaming services now, these unofficial Beatles documentaries where they can't use any of the proper music. I've seen a few of those over the years, and this is one of the better ones because they are able to use a lot of archive footage of the Beatles in like interviews and stuff. I think actually even the bootleg Beatles, the famous tribute band, may provide some music for this, if I remember rightly. Nothing really to say about the packaging. Nice outer slipcase, but there's no booklet or anything, and the Blu-ray itself isn't massively interesting. It Was 50 Years Ago Today. Sgt Pepper and Beyond is obviously mainly about Sgt Pepper. It does sort of touch upon events before and after the recording and release of Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's got some interesting talking heads in it. You know, no one who you're really desperate to hear from. They haven't got Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr talking, but they do have Pete Best on here. I'm just looking at the information on the back. Pete Best is interviewed, who of course was the Beatles' original drummer before he was kicked out of the band, right before they made it big. If I'd known it would become free on Netflix, etc., a year or so after, I may not have bought this, but I did. It's good value for money, this, even though you can watch it for free now, or kind of free. Yeah, that's decent, that. I like it. I'm glad I've got it. The penultimate item is something that I thought about not showing because it is technically an album, but I think with this, the video aspect is the main thing in it, and it is the Beatles One Plus. Now, the Beatles One originally came out in 2000. It was the first Beatles greatest hits album that had been released, I think, really in the CD age. And it was a massive seller all over the world, hit #1 in almost every country it was released in. And then 15 years later, 2015, this set came out, One Plus. This particular version is the Blu-ray and CD. So we've got the CD version of One, the original compilation album. And then we've got the Blu-ray that shows all the promo videos. I mean, this is a really nice set. I mean, they've really packaged it lovely here as well. There are the Blu-ray discs with all the promo videos on and other little bits as well. Beautiful book there that's got lots of reading material attached into the digibook here. For me, that's worth the price of admission alone, that. And then that disc is the album. So it's an album, and I wasn't really showing albums, but the main seller for this reissue, this One Plus project from 2015, is definitely the fact that for the first time ever, all of the Beatles' important promo videos were included. As far as actual sets go, out of all the ones I've shown, I think this is the nicest. So that is a really nice set. I recommend that to anybody. And finally, the last thing, I think it's the last thing, is what I believe is the most recent Beatles release in my Blu-ray collection. And it is 8 Days a Week, the touring years. This is the Ron Howard documentary that came out 2016, I think it was. Now, I wasn't expecting an awful lot from this when I first heard about it. I was like, oh, Ron Howard. I kind of like some of Ron Howard's films, but I thought, is he a documentarian? I'm sure he's a Beatles fan, but is he going to do this justice? I was kind of expecting it to be very subpar to maybe kind of like an extended edition of one of the Anthology episodes, but with a very American slant. When I first heard about this, I was in two minds thinking, I'm not sure if this will be any good. But you know what? I was pleasantly surprised. I just decided to order the Blu-ray. I didn't see it at the cinema, and I thought it was pretty good. I don't think it's as good as Anthology, but because it's focusing mainly on the Beatles on tour, it can go into more detail that certain episodes of Anthology obviously couldn't, due to time constraints for the series. But this is good. I think Ron Howard does a great job writing a love letter to the Beatles. There again, there isn't really anything sort of negative in here. Sort of the main negatives are them talking about no longer wanting to tour, but there's nothing sordid or against the Beatles brand in here. It is an official Beatles product. Nice set this. It's got a nice hard outer case. Couple of discs there. Disc 1 with the main feature, disc 2 with some extras, and a pretty thick book here. There again, cannot fault the Beatles with the booklets here. That's it. That is my Beatles collection on DVD and Blu-ray. If you like this video, then please let me know in the comments, and I can do similar videos relating to DVDs and Blu-rays that I've got for other acts in my music collection. So if you'd like to see a similar video to this but dedicated to another band that I collect, then please let me know. But thank you to all my subscribers, thank you to all my patrons, and please will you join me again next time for my next music related video. Cheers everyone. See ya!